Hello, can everyone hear me? Someone raise their hand or give me a thumbs up or something. Awesome. Great. So welcome to open office hours. I am Indrani. I've been working with Leland for, I think, about a year and a half or two now. Um, and I really enjoy coaching people. In my history, I was at the Stanford Law School in the admissions office. So I have actually read thousands of applications over the years, and I switched to being a full-time coach after working at Stanford for many years. I worked both at the law school and also at the School of Engineering. And today I'm going to be focusing on law and talking about whatever you want me to talk about. So this is really an open office hours. And you can either unmute yourself or you can chat in the chat room. And I will try and keep my eyeballs on that chat window. Please bear with me as I might not be able to go as fast as you if everyone's shooting questions at me really quickly. And I also would like to try and keep the questions to more general questions. If you have a very unique situation or circumstance that you want advice about, I would be happy to do an intro call with you. So you can always schedule one with me after this event if you have a specific question that is unique to yourself. That way we can make sure that all the questions that I answer might be helpful to everyone. So let's get started. I put some bubbles up here to give you some ideas if you haven't really thought about what questions you have, and I can start talking about other things or just random things that come to mind if you don't have questions yet, but let's see. Yeah, you can raise your hand or you can just chat or you can unmute yourself and I will be happy to answer your questions. Oops. Anyone? So maybe I'll just start with talking about the general timeline of law school applications. Although a lot of people start thinking about the whole process in like June, I recommend that you actually start thinking about it now. There's a bunch of stuff that you can do now that will kind of prepare you and set yourself up for success and also make the pace a lot kind of smoother and more relaxed. So you'll be done when everyone else is kind of scrambling. So some of the stuff that you can think about right now is obviously the LSAT. If you haven't started studying, I highly recommend you do. You will also want to do kind of a diagnostic practice test to see where you stand. And I recommend the first time you take your test, if you haven't taken it already, is June. And that way you can study some more if you don't like your score and take it again in October. And the latest I recommend you take the test is October for the upcoming cycle. Someone just asked, how do you recommend answering optional questions? That's a great question. So optional questions, I honestly feel are optional. So they put them out there as an opportunity for you to give them more information. But if you're reading optional essay questions and you're feeling stuck or you don't really have anything to say, you're not inspired, I would recommend you let it go because I think it's worse to force yourself to answer an optional question than to not answer it at all. The only exception to this rule is if the optional question is about why do you like our school? Why do you want to go here? If they're asking for you to tell them why you like them, I recommend you do that one. Other ones that are optional, I think like Georgetown has a bunch. There's some schools that have a whole bunch that you can choose from. And if you're not inspired, just let it go. What are some steps to start looking towards applying to law school as a freshman? When is the best time to start thinking about the LSAT or the earliest you should take it? So that's great. It's really wonderful to start thinking about law school when you're still in college, and especially as a freshman, you can line up activities that make sense and start studying for the LSAT. I don't think you have to study for it now. And remember, it is only good for 5 years. So if you take it too early and you're not applying right after college, it might expire. But definitely taking practice tests and maybe dabbling with studying now when you have some free time. I think it's more important to keep your grades up right now. And the other really great thing you can do if you're still in school is get to know your professor so you have some really robust letters of recommendation. And when you're thinking of activities to do, I'd much rather you go for quantity over quality over quantity, meaning pick an activity like join a club, be a member for a while, then maybe run for an office. And then by the time you graduate, you're president. That's really showing a commitment and dedication to one thing. And I think that's a lot better than kind of doing something for a quarter or a semester and something else where you're not really showing that commitment. And the other thing I recommend is that you pick activities that are really interesting to you over what you think an admissions committee wants to see. The application process and what they're looking for is really diverse, and there really isn't a definition of the ideal activity to do. So pick something that really is inspiring and fun and interesting for you and show some dedication to it. And that is just good enough. That's great. Does timing matter for SLS law and the amount of times you take the LSAT? So generally speaking, and not just for Stanford, the AdComs don't love it when people take it 4 or 5 times, even though that's allowed. It just kind of shows lack of confidence, I guess. And also, if you take it that many times, 4 or 5, sometimes the scores really go up and down, and it doesn't really show progression. I recommend you start studying early and hard and don't study 10 hours a day, but especially if you start now and your plan to take it in June, you can study for on the weekends and a couple hours a night, or just 1 hour, and take breaks and make sure you're really refreshed and really absorbing the information. Look into different ways of studying. Some people do well with their own book. Other people need a personal tutor. Some people like the group classes. So kind of explore what works best for you and take it in June and then October. If you don't like the score in October or June, you can take it again. November, I would say, would be the very latest you should take it. But think of the optics. A lot of times when people take it 3 times, there's 2 scores that are lower than the high score. And then it's kind of like the high score gets lost amongst the 2 low scores, just the way the optics are. And if you take it twice, the high score kind of floats to the top. So try and just take it twice. If you have to take it 3 times, I would recommend only doing that if you were sick or something else happened one of the times and you cancel the score and then take it again. Let me see. Let me scroll up here. Timing matter for Stanford. So when I was working at Stanford, we really didn't, despite what Reddit says, and when I work with people, I tell them to stay away from Reddit because it just gets confusing and stressful. Yeah, so our application would open in September, but would we start making decisions the first day? No, because we have like 5 applications. And if we start making decisions before that critical mass, it just makes no sense because we might be filling seats with people that aren't the best. So what we would do is really wait. We would collect all the applications, and we didn't really start making any mass decisions till over the winter break, believe it or not. So if you apply by Thanksgiving, you're plenty early. You don't have to scramble to try and apply in September for any school. Let's see here. What are some of the steps to start looking towards applying to law school as a freshman? I did that one, sorry. Does SLS host law tours? So they don't do group tours, but you can make an appointment and meet with a admissions officer. I definitely recommend that you make an appointment. You can pop in, but it's just, you might get to talk to someone, but you might not. So make an appointment and you bring your questions. They're not going to treat it like an interview, and it won't really move the needle necessarily to come and visit. but answer questions, and you can take, you can wander around, check out the library, and maybe talk to some current students and stuff like that. Once you're admitted, then they host a formal admissions visit. So I do recommend visiting schools that you're interested in, because sometimes you'll go to a school and see the campus and it's just really not a good feeling, or it's not the culture that you're looking for. So it's great to go for your own edification and visit schools if you have the means and time to do so. Can you still apply to law school in February, or is that too late for the T14 20 to 20 schools? It's getting kind of late. I mean, obviously you can still apply. The deadline hasn't passed, but they have started filling up the classes. I am hearing from my clients that have finished applying already, and they're hearing from various schools already. So that means that the application cycle is kind of winding up. So I would recommend not scrambling to apply at this point and maybe waiting for a year, which I understand could be disappointing. I mean, you can still definitely apply, but I think that the chances are less than if you had applied, back in November or December. What is the what is my perspective on upcoming admission cycles given the potential flood of public service minded professionals applying in the future? How would you recommend applicants in public service to continue to differentiate themselves from others? That's a good question, and I think it's a general question for many different types of fields that people are looking for. I don't like to look at it as how can I differentiate myself. I think that's the wrong perspective. Instead, you should just work really hard to, pick your passion, talk about it authentically, tell the story of how you want to help people. And it's not, I mean, everyone tells their story in a different way. If I was to say, well, you should use this angle or that angle, and then everyone used that angle, then no one would be differentiating themselves because they'd all be kind of telling the same story. So I have a lot of public service applicants right now that I'm working with, and every one of them has a very unique, compelling story that we've crafted over the last few months. And even if they're working towards public interest, they all have their own kind of niche or nuance. So I think that's just try and make sure that you're talking authentically and you're telling your story and your passion comes through. And I think that's the best advice I can give you. When I work with people on brainstorming, I start, as early as possible in the process with them, and we really try and figure out the way to tell the most compelling story. Sometimes I do read a first draft and think it's a little cliche, and then we'll try and rework it so that it doesn't come across that way anymore. I'm currently applying this cycle, and I decided to apply at the start of December. Because of this, I was only able to study for 7 weeks. I think this is one of those questions. Apologies in advance, Gabriel. It sounds like it's kind of unique to yourself. So I would love to talk to you about that. Maybe we could do a quick meeting. You could schedule an interest call with me and we can go over your situation. After how many years out of school would a letter of rec from a professor be no longer essential? I'd say 4 or 5 years, but my biggest advice is if you have a professor that you really loved and you got to know them really well back in school, even if it was 4 or 5 years ago, they might remember you. I mean, I asked one of my professors. I was out for 5 years. He totally remembered me for grad school. He wrote me a letter of rec. So it really doesn't hurt to ask. And if it's kind of no harm, no foul, I always ask people to try and think back on a professor that they really liked and go ahead and ask them. And if they say no, then you go with your employer recs. But if they say yes, then you're pleasantly surprised and you get a great academic letter. And it doesn't matter how long ago the person taught you. If they have a good recollection of your interactions and how you were, it's perfectly fine. But in terms of it not being essential, I think there are people who, especially if you've gone to a really huge school and you've been out for 3 years, it might be hard to get a letter of rec from a professor, and it's understandable. So you could also write a little short addendum about that, saying that you went to a huge school and it was a few years ago, and then just do professional recs instead. What is your recommendation approach for someone who has been working deep in another industry for the last couple of years post undergrad and is looking to make a career pivot? Um, so the if you can't get a letter of rec from a professor, then you would get a letter of rec from your work. And if you work with people who have a law degree, then that would be a great person to ask. But I think technically the topic or the context in which you've worked with these people doesn't really matter. It's pretty much about transferable skills. So if you are working and trying to pivot and you can only get letters from work, I would ask people that you report to, not necessarily colleagues in the same level as you, but people you report to who can talk about things like your communication skills and your dedication and your work ethic and critical thinking and all of those kind of core skills that would be important for someone going into law school. I hope that answers your question. And again, if I don't get to your question or I'm not really getting it and you're like, that's not really what I meant, that's perfectly fine. Just uh, schedule an intro call. Sorry, I can't talk. Schedule an intro call with me and I'll be happy to go over your individual questions. What is your advice for addressing a CNF besides talking to people at the campus to get the vibe? Oh, culture and fit. I thought you were talking about the disclosures. Mentioning classes you like to take and professors you'd like to work with and clubs, organizations you like to be a part of. Besides talking to people at the campus, I would talk to alums. So one of my general recommendations is go onto the LinkedIn group network of your undergrad school and then search that group for people who have gone to different law schools and they've already graduated and maybe they're working now, and you can ask them what it was like. I think, the websites and current students, they're kind of, they're probably going to say mostly great things. So it's great to have an alum give you the truth. And that way is a good way to weed out or maybe even add in schools that you hadn't thought about. What do I think makes Stanford Law special? That's a that's a hard question. I think, well, obviously the caliber of the faculty, and it's also a really small school. They have admit about 275 people for a class of about 175. So it's super small. So you really get to know the professors, and it's also in the Silicon Valley, which for people going into tech is a draw. But it's one of the top 3, 4 schools, and it has been for many years. So it's a beautiful campus, and I love it. I recommend you visit if you can, but it's kind of has everything. It has the clinics, it has great job placement, recruiting, a good career center. The list goes on and on. Can you speak to the timeline for studying, applying to KHS, and then applying for the schools? So KHS is it's the Knight Hennessy Scholars, completely different application process. And they actually have a deadline much earlier than the law school, and you apply simultaneously. And so the timeline, I would recommend you get started on really thinking about those essay prompts. It's kind of an in-depth process and it's highly competitive. I think they admit about 30 people. So I would definitely start working on that earlier than law school or simultaneously to studying for the LSAT. Can I give specific month-to-month recommendations of what to do? So right now, it's really early. The applications are still open for the current cycle. So if you're planning on applying for the next cycle, I would recommend just hunkering down if you haven't taken the LSAT yet and just focus on that. And also thinking about who you can ask for letters of recommendation. Once you get your LSAT score, even if it's the first time you've taken it, you'll kind of have an idea of how it went and whether you're going to take it again, but you can start putting together that preliminary school list. If you're happy with your LSAT score, then you could actually do kind of a final school list. I also recommend tinkering and playing around with the LSAC portal because that can be a little bit tricky when you're looking at the applications. And right now, since the applications are still open, you can actually dig around early before they close the applications and kind of get familiar with the letters of rec module and look at the essay prompts and kind of get a feel for that whole thing. Look at the credential assembly service process. If you need accommodations for LSAT, that's something you should probably do now. If you're taking the LSAT in June, I don't really think you have to start writing essays till after that. So start in the summer. You can start writing your essays, finalize your school list. And when you ask your letter writers, I would give them a month or two. You can ask them really early, and also ask more people than you think you need. If you only ask 2 people and 1 flakes, then you're kind of stuck. So think of 3 people. Most schools require 2, and they'll let you do more. The other nice thing is the people you ask, if they write one and you don't end up using it, they'll never know. You can also have extra ones kind of waiting in the wings, because if you are waitlisted, which will happen to most of you, some schools say you can send over a new letter of rec, and it's kind of nice to have an extra letter of rec just kind of sitting there waiting for that. Let's see, what can candidates with a low GPA do to compensate for their grades aside from a strong LSAT GRE score? I think so. A lot of this is, I think of the essays as the only thing you really have 100% control over. Everything else is kind of historical. So you have a test score, you took it in the past, you have letters of rec about interactions you've had in the past. Your resume is all stuff, mostly stuff that you've done in the past. So your essays are wide open, and I really think that's the thing that can help you the best. Really kicking butt on your essays, and 90% of the work I do with my clients, it's essay writing and really honing the message, making it really polished, and clear and concise and compelling. So that's the most important thing, I think, if you already have an LSAT score, and obviously you've already graduated. And the GRE you mentioned, if you still have not taken either test, or even if you have a GRE score that's still good, I really recommend you take an LSAT score, LSAT test, even though schools say that they will accept GREs, the LSAT is much more highly regarded, and people applying with a GRE only, there isn't that much data. But if you look at the ABA 509 reports, I will chat that here in case you don't know what that is. The ABA 509 reports are mandated data that the ABA requires of all accredited law schools, that every year they submit statistics and information about the last incoming class. So you can look up the 2024 incoming class 509 by Googling any law school and ABA 509. You'll get a PDF with a bunch of data, including, the median test scores and GRE, GPA, and it actually has how many people applied with a GRE. And you'll notice if you look that the number of people that applied with a GRE is very small, the number that they've admitted. I just don't think that law school AdComs are considering the GRE as helpful as the LSAT in terms of potential outcomes. They really believe that the LSAT is the way to predict how someone will do in law school. And that's why it counts more than a 4-year degree, which I totally disagree with between me and you. I don't think it's fair that someone can have a 4.0 at a top college and then take a 3-hour test and be dinged for this test score, but it is what it is. So, but if you have LSAT or GRE that you're not really crazy about, or a GPA, I really think the best thing you can do is really focus on those essays. Do you recommend taking the LSAT a max of 3 times and 4 to 5? Yeah, I really do think 3 times should be your max, unless something catastrophic happened and, for example, you were really sick or something during one of the attempts, and you can write an addendum about that. But 4 and 5 test takes is a lot. What advice would you provide to a candidate responding to the diversity statement in order to prevent sounding cliche? So this is kind of the same thing that I say about regular essays too. The diversity statement, diversity means anything and everything now, and it can be just kind of like how you have built your perspective and why it would be different and how it will contribute to the community at the law school you're applying to. So it's something that you just have to kind of write from the heart, and it can be about a hardship, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of times, let's see, I've had people talking about their upbringing, and one student I had this year talked about sharing like cultural food as part of her like her passion, sharing her food from her culture and learning about other food cultures. People talk about having grown up in different countries or being mixed, uh, like interracial from an interracial marriage. But then there's other people who talk about their religion. They talk about, I mean, it's wide open. You just have to think about what you bring to that community and why it will be beneficial. So that's another thing I can help with. And so it does get hard. I mean, I know that people get writer's block or they can't think of what to write. So brainstorming is really important. And trying not to filter yourself, I think, is another important thing. Don't think, when you're first starting to think of an idea, don't go, oh, this sounds cliche, because I think there's many ways to tell a story. And yeah, there's a cliche way. And then you can also tell it in such a way that it's not cliche. And I think that's one way that a coach can really help you partner with you to figure out the best way to do that. Does SLS value extracurriculars and volunteering? I've worked really hard to be super involved in school and legal organizations, but I most likely only have one recommender. Also, do LOR recommenders have to write an LOR for each school you apply? So this is kind of a mixed bag question. So I think every law school does value extracurriculars and volunteering. It just shows another dimension to your background and experiences. I think it's someone who's purely academic and hasn't done anything extracurricular when compared to someone who has the great academic record and also has dedicated time to do something extra. The person who's done extra stuff will probably get admitted over the person who hasn't. And that isn't just Stanford. That's for every school. And just to let you guys know, I coach for every school. I happen to have a Stanford background, but my coaching isn't just for Stanford. It's for every school. So, and most of the time, I will say what all these questions, they apply to any school that you're applying to. So if you have time and you have a passion, I would recommend that you do volunteer or you can get an internship. Now, the other thing though, I don't recommend you try and pick internships and extracurriculars based upon what you think AdComs are looking for. I kind of said this before. If you're doing something you're not passionate about or isn't interesting to you just because you think that it will help you get into law school, you're not really doing yourself any favors because you won't be able to write about it with that passion. And you have to be aware too, interning at law firms, sometimes it's just answering phones and filing papers. So um, you might want, you might be better off volunteering at an NGO. I have people who have volunteered, for example, at the Innocence Project or in prisons if they're interested in criminal law. So there's other things you can do besides getting a law internship at a firm. If that sounds interesting to you, that's great. You would also kind of get some of your own education just in terms of working in that kind of environment to see if it fits for you. So a lot of this is also edification for yourself, not just for your resume, but just think of what you really have a passion about. And there's no ideal background or experience these days for what you need to get into law school. I have people who have majored in everything from music to computer science. I have accountants. I also have philosophy majors, English majors, history majors, poli-sci majors, but it's really running the gamut these days, and there's really no right or wrong answer. You just have to you have to produce that narrative, and you have to show your activities support the narrative and for what you want to do after law school and why you need a law degree to do it. And I recommend always sounding very convicted about what you want to do with a law degree. Don't don't say, I'm not really sure what I want to do yet, but I'll explore in law school. I've seen a lot of essays that start out that way, and that sounds a little bit non-committal, or they're just going to law school because they don't know what else to do with their lives. So even if you don't know exactly right now, I suggest you pretend, do a snapshot, talk about what interests you now. If you change your mind later, it doesn't matter. No one's ever going to read those essays again. But definitely sound convicted, like you know exactly what you want to do. I think that's a much better strategy than telling them that you're going to explore. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Oh, this person also asked about letters of rec. Um, no, the letters of rec should be generic. Definitely have them write just about your potential for law school in general, because you're going to use the same letter of rec for all the schools. What do I think of using AI not to copy and paste, but to enhance your essays? I looked at applications and a lot prohibit using AI. Even and I would say stay completely away of that. Where just don't even think about it. Um, yeah, it's prohibited, and you really should be able to tell your own. I mean, these stories that you're telling, they're about you and your experiences. So you should be able to articulate that yourself, communicate that yourself without the help of AI. And that's what a coach is for, to really help you brainstorm and get that story out. And I don't think you should have to use AI for that. Oops, sorry. Sorry about that. Does having legal experience on a resume give you an advantage in applications like working at a law firm, for example? So again, I don't think admissions committee people are looking for that. If you have it, great, but a lot of people get into law school without having that. A lot of people get into law school. They learn that they want to go to law school because of whatever they're doing at work. Sometimes it's law adjacent, or sometimes they realize that if they had a law degree, they could do more. Um, so it's not required at all. You can get into law school with any kind of work experience. And again, I think the most important part is at the time you're writing your essays, your resume, your work experience, and what you talk about all kind of comes together to convince them that you need a law degree to reach your goals. And a pivot's perfectly fine too. Sometimes someone has an experience personally that inspires them to go to law school, and that's perfectly fine as well. I've had people successfully apply to law school where they have their whole resume is something else, but then something that happened in their life made them want to go to law school. So the sky's the limit. There really is no wrong or right answer. You just have to kind of dig that story out of you. I'm at the last question. Are there more questions? We still have about 10, 15 minutes to go. Let's see, what can I talk about? Um, Character and fitness. I so some of you might have a character and fitness issue. I have most of my, not most, but many people have some sort of character and fitness question that they have to answer positively. Character and fitness is a section of the application, in case you're not familiar, asking if you've ever been on academic probation, or have you ever been put on an involuntary leave of absence, or have you ever been released from a employment position, or been, accused of a crime or convicted of a crime. So it can be anything. And the interesting thing about character and fitness, the ABA is one of the few entities in the country that can actually see expunged records. So even if you went through all the trouble to get something expunged from your record, the ABA can still see it. I think it's because being a lawyer, and passing the bar, that it's kind of a high expectation, and they want to make sure that they're letting people pass the bar that are of sound mind and honest and not going to take advantage of people or commit crimes with their law degree. So I always recommend, if you can answer yes to any of the character and fitness questions, and just to disclose, those should not be, 10 pages long. You can write a short paragraph. I've had people write a few sentences about shoplifting when they were 15 years old. I've had, moving violations. Some schools care about those. DUIs, they care about those. Or being, going through any sort of academic, uh, like a peer review situation for cheating, or other fundamental standards that you might have broken. Many people have gotten in trouble drinking on campus and had to go to some sort of alcohol class. So these are all things that you might have to disclose if they are in your record. I recommend, if it's a school thing, that you call your school registrar's office to see what exactly is in your file. Sometimes I found that something happens at school and the person thinks it's in their file, but it actually isn't. And other times they think it's not in their file and it is. And these are all things the ABA is going to review. So make sure you know exactly what's going on. Same thing with, if you think your record was expunged, I would call the police station of where you got in trouble. Make sure you know what's in your record, or look at the county records office and figure out what is going on there so that you can disclose honestly and completely. How would I describe the general culture and fit of Stanford students? So, I mean, it's a really small school, so it's very collegial. It doesn't feel that competitive compared to some other schools. And Stanford students in general, across the board, they kind of work hard and play hard. So, yeah, it's a fun atmosphere. It seems like people get along really well, but it's hard. It's a very competitive school, and once you get there, school is going to be hard. You're going to be studying really hard, and lots of it's 3 years of stress, really. But I think that's why it's play hard and work hard. You can take breaks and stuff. I highly recommend that you, when you're in law school or any kind of grad school, really, don't be 100% academic. You need to take breaks. You need to get fresh air. So, manage your time well so that you can spare a bit of time for fun activities. Specifically for the law clinics, Anita, are you talking about once you're in school or as you're applying? So the question was specifically for the law clinics at Stanford. Okay, how can we demonstrate interest in the clinics in a way that we stand out? So I think, okay, so a lot of schools have a why essay as optional or required. And the why essay is like, why do you want to go to our school? This is the place where you would bring in clinics, opportunities, other opportunities like that, journals, clubs. And I think the best way to demonstrate real interest is not just talk about, and you have this great thing, and you have that great thing, and I want to participate in this thing, but you talk about your background or interests and how you can contribute to that opportunity. So if you're interested in con law and you have some special interest or experience that can help contribute to that clinic and make it a more enriching opportunity for other people, that's what you can really focus on. You don't want to just talk about what you're going to gain, but also what you're going to give. Okay. We have about 5 more minutes. Um, how about resume? So a lot of people I meet have a ton of work experience, but they're trying to squeeze it into one page. And actually, you don't have to do that. Um, Most schools will allow for 2 pages. So I don't want you to fluff the resume up if you don't have stuff to say. But if you're finding that your experiences are having a hard time fitting on one page, definitely go on to the second page, and it's perfectly fine. Your resume is not a document that's going to make or break your admission outcomes. It's more of a supportive document. And so I recommend, when you're writing your essay about why you want to go to law school, you don't want to regurgitate your resume and say, when I was at this job, I did this, and this, and I learned this, and that. I mean, that's really a waste of prime real estate on your essays if you're just kind of talking about what you can say on your resume. So I recommend having a really robust resume that explains what you've done, maybe even what you've learned. And that way you can just refer to that experience in your essay and talk about something else that they won't find in your resume. Otherwise, it's really boring. That essay gets really boring. And it's kind of just like two resumes. One is in bullet points and one is in prose. And that's the wrong approach. Can you please explain the process of negotiating a scholarship and anything we should keep in mind? Sure. So let's say you have two scholarships. One is from, um, or you have, let's say you get an offer for one scholarship and it's like a top 30 school. And then you go to Stanford and say, well, this school wants me to go and they gave me X dollars. How can you match that? That's probably not going to work. Stanford and the other top schools, they don't generally give as much money out as the lower ranked schools because the money is a recruiting tool. And for a lot of the top schools, they really don't need to recruit that much. They just admit people and they go whether they're getting money or not. However, if you get a scholarship from a school and you like a different school that's kind of ranked similarly, if you like that school better and they haven't offered you anything or they offered you less, you can definitely tell them that money, especially if you're going into public interest, you don't want to graduate with a lot of debt because your plan is to go into public interest. So and so school gave me X dollars, and if they can raise your scholarship to match that, you would definitely go to their school, and that has worked before. So as long as the ranking is kind of aligned, you definitely have leverage. But if you're trying to get more money from a much higher ranked school, you probably won't have that opportunity. Hopefully that was helpful. So visits, again, I think if you visit the school, think of it as more of a edification process. Same with going to those law school forums. It usually doesn't move the needle in terms of whether you'll get in, but it can definitely help you decide what your school list should look like. And especially after you get into schools, I would recommend you visit the schools you're thinking about, because once you get on that campus, you might learn something either that you didn't know and don't like, or something you like even more, and it will help you make your decisions. Another thing I wanted to mention is the rankings. So rankings are an interesting concept. So US News and World Report, they put these rankings out every year and people stick to them and just get so excited about, top 14, top 10. Now, the interesting thing is some schools decided in the last year or two they don't want to play the game of rankings, and Harvard, for example, stopped providing the information that US News wants, and they immediately, once they told that to the US News people, their ranking dipped. So it's like, really, the rank dips when you don't provide information? That just doesn't seem like it makes it all seem fake. So yeah, rankings still count, quote unquote, but I really suggest people, especially if you're going to public interest or you're not interested in big law, you don't have to go to a top 10 school to have a great career. So one way to diversify your school list is, sure, apply to a handful of dream schools. I'm never going to discourage people from that, but also add some local or regional schools that are reputed in that town. So if you know where you want to land when you graduate, like you want to go back to your hometown, or you want to be in the Bay Area, for example, after you graduate, then I recommend you look at schools that are locally reputed, where the bar passage rate is great, and they get recruiters from local companies and law firms. So, for example, if you want to land in the Bay Area and you love Stanford and you're in Berkeley, there's another school, Santa Clara, that you may or may not have heard of, that is not highly ranked if you look at US News and World Report. However, it's it's a great school for high tech, and it's in the heart of the Silicon Valley, and Google and Apple and Meta and all sorts of companies recruit from there, as do a lot of San Francisco and San Jose law firms. And the people that go to Santa Clara, many of them pass the bar the first time. They have a great bar passage rate. They have great career statistics. So I really recommend you kind of think out of the box in terms of putting that school list together. Don't have it heavy on the top 10. If you kind of pick a couple of regional schools in places that you want to land, then you'll definitely have more outcomes at the end, more options. Can I explain what I mean by public interest? Sure. So public interest would be going out and advocating maybe for like marginalized people, or going and doing public defending, or being a prosecutor for county office or something. They don't pay very well. So if you're going into that kind of law and you won't have a really high salary, it's hard to pay off your debt, and that's why you can use that if you're saying, if you're authentically going into public interest and that's what your essay is about, and you don't get any money, then that's one way of trying to ask for money, because you won't have that huge salary to pay off your loans. Anything else? Oh, we're out of time. I can answer one or two more questions if you have them. Otherwise, we can sign off. And again, if you have individual situations that you'd like me to talk with you through, then please come on over to my profile and schedule an intro call. And I work hourly with people. I also have a bunch of packages. I'm also totally open to creating custom packages. And there's a code down there for 10% off the comprehensive package that I do. And basically the comprehensive package is from everything from like right now through when you're deciding to go to law school. So every essay that you have to write, talking about letters of rec, helping with your resume, any kind of strategy questions you have, and then when you're waitlisted, what you need to do, and then when you're negotiating scholarships and trying to decide where to go. It's pretty much a whole year long partnership for the cycle. So I still have capacity for the coming cycle. Usually my capacity is filling up in March and April. So just keep that in mind if you're interested. And thank you so much for joining me tonight. If you came late, there will be a recording of this. So, and I'll send it to all of you so that you can watch the beginning if you missed it. All right. All right. Have a good night, everyone.